It's not so much whether computers of today can pass the Turing test. They can. It's not even so much whether they know they can pass the Turing test. They know they can. The real question is, how well do they know that? Similarly, the question is not whether we believe in God as humans. We do believe in God. The question is, how well do we know that we believe in God? You might say, well, so what about somebody like Sam Harris? What about all the atheists? They don't believe in God. Well, they believe. They just don't know how well they believe. They reveal their belief through their language, through their speech. Every time they say, well, if God this, or if God that, or even if there was a God, or if there was a God this, or if there was a God that, they reference him probably more than the average person. And just like we can't understand those individuals that go running once in a while into the fire that they build at Burning Man festival, similarly, we can't understand why these individuals go running into a state of intellectual suicide and go running into a funeral pyre of ridiculousness and stupidity. When Richard Dawkins reaches the end of his turtles and says, well, the first cell just had to happen. And I guess out of all those first cells, maybe one of them just had to be able to self-replicate, just had to happen. Or when Sam Harris says, well, if this individual had dead children in his basement, I wouldn't care. Or when he makes some crazy hyperbolic statement about some world leader and say that it isn't hyperbolic. It's like some individual running themselves into the fire at Burning Man, and we have no idea why. We can just sit back and look and go, well, he believes in God now. He went to meet him. Hello, friends. It's Patrick here again. I'm sorry I introduced this video a little differently because I woke up with that thought swimming through my brain and I wanted to get that out on video because I'm lazy, because I don't want to write it down. So there, I spit it out. For your viewing pleasure or for my memory purpose, does it really matter? I'm just glad I was able to get that out of my mind. We're getting through it. William James, I've already wasted 4 minutes of this video and 4 minutes of your time. I apologize, but how far did we reach today? Did we make it through to the end? No, not yet. We're not finished yet. I believe the last video that we covered was Pragmatism and Religion. Did we cover that? Lecture 8. And now we're from the meaning of truth. We covered the office preface to the meaning of truth, didn't we? Yes, we did. We covered that already. So now we move on. The next essay is called The Function of Cognition. And that is from the meaning of truth. So the section that we're on is called The Function of Cognition. And we go through here. And let's see if we can get that footnote. Let's see if we can find that. Yes, that's right. That footnote was missing. We had a footnote on the next section, which I marked down here for you, was presented in October of 1909. So I'm going to be talking about that in a second. But this particular one, the function of cognition, is using the same footnote as the next section, but it doesn't reference it in the notes. And so I can only assume the publisher wanted those two footnotes to go together. Does that make any sense to you? Probably not, but it's not significant. The lecture was given in front of Yale University, and that was in October of 1904. As just to get a determination of where we were, and it says here, reprinted with slight verbal revision from Mind, the publication at the time, probably still being publicated today, or published today, publicated. Volume 13, NS, page 457, October 1904. A couple of interpolations from another article in Mind, Humanism and Truth Once More, in volume 14 have been made. And so I apologize, I gave the wrong reference. I said it was from a lecture at Yale University, and I stand corrected. That was from an upcoming section, which was in 1896, was from a lecture at Yale. So I got a little bogged down in the details here. Once again, I apologize, but let's move forward. Humanism and Truth. Now, this is interesting. The reason this section is interesting is that we are seeing the evolution, you could call it the philosophical evolution of a new stream of thought, or a new category of philosophical thought evolving in front of our very eyes. And this is why the date may be of particular importance to some of you armchair philosophers out there, just as I like to consider myself an armchair philosopher, even though I have a degree in philosophy. Maybe that counts a little more. I don't know. There's my boasting coming out. Get back in there, ego. Here we go. Here's a statement from William James. I think that Mr. Schiller's proposal to call the wider pragmatism by the name of humanism is excellent and ought to be adopted. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? So in 1904, as William James was parading around his idea and giving lectures on pragmatism, somebody came out and said, oh, you know what's a good word for that pragmatism that you're teaching? Humanism. And William James said, hey, you know what? That's an excellent idea. And so humanism it probably was from that point forward, or a variation of it. And so what else does he talk about here? He says he's talking about someone else's work. And listen to what James says. He says, I deeply regret to say that his laborious article throws for my mind absolutely no useful light upon the subject. It seems to me on the whole an ignoratio elenchi, and I feel free to disregard it altogether. That really sums up how I feel about a lot of William James's articles. He goes on to start talking about humanism. Bottom of page 164 talks about humanism. And then here's a dig he likes to make. Reminded of those Catholic writers who refused Darwinism by telling us that higher species cannot come from lower because menis nequit genere plus. He constantly refers to Latin, to German, to French. This is a guy who must have spoke 4, 5, 6 languages, and he uses them frequently. And he says these refutations sound oddly antiquated and scholastic. I cannot help suspecting that the humanistic theory is going through this kind of would-be refutation at present. Isn't that interesting? So this is right around the time when Darwin just bombshelled his information on the world. And he says, oh, all these refutations come up. Well, the same thing is happening about his humanistic theory, he calls it. The one condition of understanding humanism is to become inductive-minded oneself, to drop rigorous definitions and follow lines of least resistance on the whole. In other words, an opponent might say, resolve your intellect into a kind of slush. This is what someone is telling him you have to do to be able to believe in his ideas of pragmatism. Even so, I make reply, if you will consent to use no politer word. So he agrees with the anonymous opponent to his ideas and says, yeah, I'll take that. Although he would prefer a more polite word. Yeah, he agrees. You got to let your brain turn to slush to be able to accept pragmatism. Or, as he often calls it, radical empiricism. Or humanism, as he goes on. He wants to cover all his bases. Up to about, this is the author again speaking, up to about 1850, almost everyone believed that science expressed truths that were exact copies of a definite code of non-human realities. He doesn't give specific examples of that, but this is his statement. And he says, now we realize they are true so far as they are useful, but no farther. And so he goes on to say that theological ideas are only true in the humanistic-like degree. So for James, any idea, whether scientific or metaphysical, is only true insofar as it has positive consequences or insofar as it is expedient. He uses that term often as something that's useful. If it's not useful, he says to him it's untrue. That's the summation of his train of thought throughout the bulk of what is written here. The rest is a waste of ink and paper, in my opinion. Excuse me, I'm sorry. He has this Professor Taylor comes up again as someone that's opposed to his ideas, so I'll have to look up Taylor and see what he's all about. Professor Taylor describes pragmatism as believing anything one pleases and calling it truth. Good comment from Taylor. I'm going to look up Taylor later on when I get a chance. The humanist, for his part, is perfectly consistent, encompassing sea and land to make one proselyte if his nature be enthusiastic enough. He throws that little dig in there, knowing that a large part of his audience is going to know exactly what he's talking about. Do you know what he's talking about there? He's talking about the statement that Christ made when he said, oh, you cover land and sea to make one proselyte, and then what happens? What did Jesus say to the person that did that? Because James uses that little section of scripture to make a point about humanists and those that advocate humanist thought. Jesus used that same phrase to describe someone that makes somebody else twice as much a son of hell as themselves. Just in case you didn't know that, I'm sure most people are familiar with that statement. And so that's interesting. On the page 173, the humanist, for his part, is perfectly consistent, encompassing sea and land to make one proselyte. if his nature be enthusiastic enough. In other words, the author is admitting that such a person is on the way to hell. I'm amazed that he would make that confession about himself and about those that follow his version of pragmatism, which has come now, as we see, evolved into the category of humanism, at least at that time. He says here, Moses wrote the Pentateuch, we think, because if he didn't, all our religious habits will have to be undone. So again, he tries to relate belief to consequences. He says here, the humanism which I see and try so hard to defend is a process. No point of view can ever be the last one. So he says that any type of belief is an ongoing process. It seems to me that humanism is the only theory that builds the case out in the good direction, he says. So this is from the lecture called Humanism and Truth. And I would like to I'll try and finish this by making a statement. He says, I am well aware that this paper has been rambling in the extreme. How's that for a finish? William James, about his own work, he says, I am well aware this paper has been rambling in the extreme. And that's exactly what he does. He rambles all over the place. And there's a few other notes that I made, but I'm not going to bore you with them. So we'll move on to the next video, and I'll cut this short for today. Short? I was only hoping to do 10 minutes. I apologize. But that's where we're at. We're seeing in real time the evolution of the term humanism. If somebody asks you, well, where did humanism start? You can tell them now. You can say, well, humanism, for all intents and purposes, according to William James, the famous philosopher from late 1800s, early 1900s, the term humanism was probably coined around 1904 by a gentleman by the name of Schuster, who was commenting on the work of William James's Pragmatism. So there's a little piece of trivia for you that you can tuck away and use the next time you want to bore somebody to tears. Thank you for watching. I love you very much. God loves you more than I do. You have yourself a fantastic day. Don't forget to get outside and get some fresh air. Talk to you soon, okay? We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye.